He's already faced the Shakespearean-like slings and arrows from the Los Angeles media. And here he is on the Petros Money Show on AM 570 LA Sports. Andrew Friedman. What's cracking, Andrew? How was that press conference today? You made it through, it seems.
Would much rather have not done it because we were still playing, but it comes with the territory, and I get and don't always love, but I totally get going through it and trying to answer questions for fans and sharing our disappointment. And, I think it's an important thing to do, even if I don't necessarily love it.
Two sides, to playing the game of baseball, pitching and hitting, and it seemed like there were a lot of questions about the pitching going into this postseason, but for the most part, it felt like it held up, and it was another postseason of a lot of head-scratching surrounding the offense. It felt like it was a different offense this year, one that didn't necessarily rely on the home run versus, kind of getting a lot of hits up and down the lineup, and that just kind of didn't show up in the postseason. What is it about the playoffs that seems to so dramatically change what offenses are able to do, and how do you try to overcome that?
Great question. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer. I think so much of this comes down to, and with runners in scoring position in the regular season, we were elite. We led baseball in like every meaningful category. In those 4 games, we did not, and we were on the other end. Now, during the year, we went through 4-game stretches where we weren't very good. I remember the series in May in San Francisco, we got swept there where, I'm making it up, but we were like 2 for 28 with runners in scoring position. Those things do happen. Now, the question is, how much of that is just baseball? How much of it are things that we can learn from and do differently? Again, as a group, we were elite during the season. And so, some instances where we hit balls hard that happen to go to people, but way more at-bats in those 4 games were not competitive enough. And a lot of those guys have postseason experience. A lot of those guys went through this season and handled those situations well. So the exact reason why, it's hard. And it's important to tune out as much of the noise as we can, because all that matters right now is learning from it and trying to apply things to help us be better in the future. And so by noise, I mean not overreacting to something that ends up making us worse. And it's really being able to identify levers we can pull, even if just on the margins, that can help us be better. And that's what we're going to focus on and pour ourselves into, because unfortunately, that's the only productive thing we can do right now.
Have you and your team been able to, and I mean the team in the front office, because clearly you've been able to work in those margins and exploit some inefficiencies. I mean, you've done it your whole career, but in the playoffs, do you find that perhaps statistical measures don't hold as well as they do in the regular season? And by that, I mean just certain players are okay in the playoffs, that they tend to operate at their average or better, while others tend to fall off. And I just think about the platoons, about Cody saying, why wasn't I in the starting lineup against a righty? That's, or Joey Gallo not getting at bats when one swing can change things, but I'm sure the analytics say, well, he's just not good in this spot. Is there something to that when you've kind of digested all the numbers, that maybe it doesn't matter as much, and guys just get hot and other guys go cold in the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of those decisions of whether to play Belly or Gallo are in the middle. You could make an argument for one guy over another. There's not necessarily a right answer. A lot of things fall in that middle. And, Dave, our coaches, our front office, we just have to make collective decisions. There are things that are more on the extremes that there's no excuse to get wrong, and I feel like we handled those well. Now, the ones that are in the middle, you can obviously argue and debate either side of it. And I'm trying to recall, you had a lot of good stuff in that question.
Just the numbers, like as a whole, do they show that it doesn't that it's harder to get numbers? I guess is what I'm asking. Harder to get definitive conclusions in the postseason.
I mean, let me give this as an example. I mean, in 2020, part of the reason we won 13 games is that Corey Seager turned into Barry Bonds. Last year, one of the reasons we lost in the NLDS is because Eddie Rosario turned into Barry Bonds. Corey Seager in 15, 16, 17, 18, he missed the postseason. 19, 21 wasn't nearly as good as he was in 20. Does that mean he wasn't clutch in the? There's so much that's involved in it that also gets to how well a pitcher happens to execute in that at bat. Because if a pitcher executes pitch after pitch, it doesn't matter what your approach is or whatever, odds are you are out. Now, I don't think that was the case in this series. I don't think they just executed so perfectly that it made it hard for us. I think there were some examples of that, but, not by and large. And so, the guys that perform in the postseason, it changes year to year. I mean, there are few select guys where that doesn't. And part of it is because we're talking about tiny samples of like 4 games. We got swept by the Pirates here earlier this year at home, and we were trying. We were trying hard. And we lost 3 games to them at home. So it speaks to when things are happening in a small series that there is more randomness and things that can pop up by definition. And so does that make it skill, luck, lack of effort? There are a lot of different reasons that people can cite. But look, I think it's pretty clear if you look back over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the best team doesn't necessarily win the World Series. And it's part of the frustrating thing of what we do, but it's also part of the excitement and the exhilaration of these games and the tenseness of them. But this is different than other sports. In the NBA, the best team almost always wins.
Right.
In baseball, that's not the case. And I don't think it takes away from the mystique. In fact, I think it adds to the intrigue in October that if, the Philadelphia Phillies, I don't remember exactly, but lost 11 of 13 games finishing the regular season. And then they got hot. If the expanded playoffs hadn't happened, they wouldn't have made the playoffs this year. Now they're in the NLCS. So a lot of things are kind of narratives after the fact, but it doesn't take away or change the incredible level of disappointment that we have and the shame of letting down our incredible fans.
Andrew Friedman is our guest, joining us and answering questions after a terrible, abrupt ending to what was a magical Dodgers season, and it's not easy to do. And I know you had to answer this question in the press conference. You hear it as a narrative, one of those things you're talking about, like a post-narrative that the Padres wanted it more, that the Dodgers were lackadaisical, that they thought that they would roll over the Padres. What is? How do you react to that, and what do you tell the fans when you hear that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't feel that way at all. Like watching the guys go about their work and how they were preparing, I didn't get that sense at all. I totally get the question after the fact, and look, when you're not getting hit with runners in scoring position, it doesn't allow momentum to build. It doesn't allow for excitement and energy to come. And so I think had we gotten some of those hits, not only would the game scores have been different, but the optics of it as well. And so, again, I think it, in a lot of ways, boils down to that. And, I think I totally get the question, but didn't feel like that was the case. But maybe I'm too close to it and didn't see it. I'm not sure exactly.
Speaking of the abrupt ending, how much does that just set you back, or not set you back, but as far as just what the team's going to look like next year, all of a sudden, all these decisions are on the forefront and those questions are being asked?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about this during the presser. We did not anticipate having this time right now to be focusing on the 23 team. And now that we do, it's on us to use it wisely. It's on us to figure out how to chart, the best course of action over the next, 6 months until we go to Glendale, to put us in the best position to go out and not have the same result next year. And so that's what we're going to pour ourselves into and do everything we can to avoid having this extra time next year.
Just kind of, again, it's hindsight. I get it. I'm not trying to second-guess decisions or anything like that. I'm asking this as a general question in terms of just a particular, hey, why did Tyler Anderson come out after 80 pitches? But is, like, before you go into games, is it all stuff that is sort of planned out, or is it stuff that is decided based on how it looks in a game? Like, hey, we've seen that Tyler against this lineup is, here's his effectiveness 1 time through, 2 times through, 3 times through. How much of that stuff is discussed beforehand and then executed because of what's discussed beforehand versus just the way you feel in the moment?
I mean, it's impossible to script out a Major League Baseball game. Tyler Anderson faced 19 hitters. That could have been 6 incredible innings. It could have been 3 not so good innings. It could have been 5 really good innings. It could have been 4 so-so innings. Like, just those things can play out in so many different ways that it is impossible to script out. I think game score matters, how much more rope. And so he was at 86 pitches. So the odds of him pitching more than an inning at most were pretty slim. And I think the fact that Machado has seen him pretty well and had some real success, especially in a 2-run game, is probably what led Doc and Mark and Danny and those guys to doing that. And I totally get it. And, I think so many of the moves that are questioned today, had they worked, they would have gotten praise for it. And I think that's just the nature of the beast and comes with people having incredible passion. And I totally get that. But, a lot of these kind of decisions, I think you could argue the other side of, and it's like 50-50 or 52-48 or 55-45. And there are definitely things that happen over the course of a game that I personally would do differently. And more often than not, with Doc and Danny and Mark and those guys just being closer to it, more often than not, they're right. But there are also those decisions that are in the middle. I think the extremes, those are inexcusable things to kind of mess up. And I think our staff does an incredible job of not doing that. And then the things that are in the middle, I think reading the game and the situation and the score and, who's available, all of those things go into it. And I totally get the other side of arguments, but I feel like it's in that close, kind of 50-50 margin type questions where you could tell me to take a side and I could argue it very passionately on either side.
Andrew Friedman, one of the most successful baseball executives. We talked to his friend Joe Madden just the other day, a long conversation. We know this was a really rough one for you and your people, and the distribution of blame is not easy, and facing the media not easy after a very tough exit. Thank you very much, Andrew, and have a good week, as good as you can.
I appreciate it. Yeah, good I don't think is going to be on the table for me this week, but we'll figure out how to pick ourselves up and pour ourselves into doing everything we can to have a different result next year.
Comfort food.
Always appreciate it. Yes, comfort foods.
That's what
there you go.
I turn to the
nice moufaletta.
A cheeseburger or a moof.
There you go.